and get started with tonight's webinar. So first and foremost, I would like to welcome everyone to our STalks Beef November webinar. We started these webinars at the beginning of January, and it's just a way for us to get together as a team and as a company with all of our customers and go live and have guest speakers on or give you guys beef bowl updates and just all stay connected once a month through Zoom in these webinars. So it's been great so far, and we always have a lot of participation. We've had a lot of great speakers on, and we're excited to continue these tonight. The first thing I want to say is just throughout the webinar, please be respectful and keep your microphones on mute. That way, when our presenter, who tonight's going to be Juan Moreno, gives his presentation, there's no background noise or anything. At the end of his presentation, I'm sure he'll open it up for questions if anyone has those. And if you don't want to turn on your mic or your video and ask your question out loud, you can also type it in the chat. And during the Q&A time, I'll read through the chats and let Juan know if whoever has typed in a question. So you don't have to ask it out loud, but you can type it in the chat as well. Also, one more thing is that I record all of these webinars. So tonight's webinar will be recorded and posted on our STgenetics Beef YouTube channel. So it will be available for everyone here in the next couple of days. If your friends or family or other customers didn't get to join on live tonight, and everyone can go back and watch that. But tonight's webinar is going to be a little bit more special than most because tonight we are extremely excited and honored to have our CEO, Juan Moreno, as our guest and as our presenter. And we get a lot of questions. So my job at ST is social media and marketing, and I handle all of our social media platforms. And on a weekly basis, I get questions. What's your company? What do you guys do? What do you guys look for? And there's just a lot of questions surrounding STgenetics and sexing technology because we are the leaders, the global leaders in sex semen technology. And I think that statement holds true, and it's big. And so tonight, Juan is going to give the story of sexed semen, past, present, and future of sexing technologies. And if there's one thing I can say about Juan, it's that he is innovative. And he thinks 10 years ahead of all of us. And so we're really excited to have him on tonight to just kind of give you an overview of our company, how it started, and where we're headed. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Juan, and I think he has a presentation. So Juan, if you would like to share your screen now and go ahead and get started, that would be great.
Well, good evening, everybody. And please feel free to ask any questions at any point in time. So I'll do a short synopsis of ST, a little bit of the history of ST, but mostly I'm going to be concentrating tonight on what we believe should be the future, not just for ST, but also for all of us as an industry, and especially for those who we service and the most important factor to us, which is our clients, the farmers. And at the end of the day, the product that we deliver to the end consumer. With that, let me share my screen if I can figure out how to use this thing. Okay, you got the screen on, Haley?
No, I can't see it yet, Juan.
Okay, so I pressed the wrong button. 1 second, let me start again. How about now?
There we go, that's good. And now if you just want to, I can see your whole screen. So if you just want to start from slide 1.
About that.
Perfect. You're good.
All right. So really, this phrase summarizes a lot of what our philosophy is all about and what we believe in. And we firmly believe in being able to be part of creating the future. Like I said, not just for us, but most importantly for our end consumers. So what is our goal at ST? So our goal is to create a sustainable future by utilizing biotechnology, bioinformatics, and biosensors to improve efficiencies in livestock production. And that's a phrase that encompasses a lot of things. But why is this important? And I think that we all have to be part of creating a sustainable future, not just for us, for ourselves, but also for future generations. Our end consumers, at the end of the day, whether the product is dairy products or beef or any type of animal livestock protein, our end consumers are those folks that are out there that go to the supermarket and buy our products every day from day after day. The world human population is expected to continue growing, even though it's growing at a slower rate than it used to. We're expected to be reaching by 2050, roughly a little bit over 10 billion people on this planet Earth. So there is going to be a lot of food that is going to be produced in order to feed this increasing population from 7 billion to 10 billion people. Roughly, it's estimated that we're going to have to produce about 50% more food, not just because of the increase in the human population, but also because the average per capita income of the population is increasing. And as the average per capita income in the population increases, the type of food that they demand is low, higher quality. That consumer base that we service at the end of the day, where do they live? And independent of what part of the world they reside in, we now see that roughly about 85%, between 80 and 87% of the population live in large population areas. That means the city, right? That also means that about the greatest majority of these people are removed from any kind of farm operation at least 2 to 3 generations, meaning my grandfather was raised in a farm. Well, my father had farms, I was raised in a farm. However, a lot of my friends, their parents is being removed from any farm production for more than 2 or 3 generations. So the demands of these people in the city is totally different than the demands of people that have been exposed to farm production. Now, in order to feed this increasing population, we also face not just with the increase in the population, but a significant increase in the life expectancy of those on this planet Earth. By 2050, we expect the global life expectancy around the world to be 75 years. So people are living longer. So it's not just only an increased number of people on this planet Earth, but also they're living longer. So therefore, even more food is going to be required. As an industry, we're faced with a barrage of alternative sources of protein, whether it is, lab-produced meat or, whatever these burgers that are made with other protein sources, and they're going to take part of this niche market. But the reality of life that independent of what part of the world you live in, the type of protein that the human population desires to consume changes a little bit depending on what the culture of the consumers are. So while in the Americas, there is a heavy emphasis in not just the utilization of chicken, meat, and eggs, we also consume a lot of beef and dairy products. On the other side of the world, there might be a higher consumption, for example, in Asia for pork products, or in the Middle Eastern countries for small ruminants like sheep and goats. Now, we have a big undernourished population around the world. And like I said, as the per capita income of the population increases, the type of animal proteins that they will desire is going to be a lot higher quality. We have great advantages in the products that we produce as a source of animal protein because the high quality of the products we produce. Milk is contains a lot of the essential nutrients that are required for good human health and development. Just likewise, beef also carries a lot of those nutritional elements that are necessary to sound health. So we are blessed with having access and being part of the production chain with this type of product, whether it's beef or milk products. But agriculture is being faced with a lot of forces that are shaping it, and that will shape it over the next 20 or 30 years as we remain. So we're going to have a massive growth in food demand. There's a significant increase in per capita incomes in countries and people around the world. We're going to have to produce all this extra food with a limited land availability. There's one thing that we cannot create more of, it is land. And that land is being competed for humans because cities are growing, So the human population is encroaching into the production of some of this protein and food sources. Water is going to be limited again because we're competing with humans. And we live in a world that is globalized, where food products move across international barriers. And those international barriers also requires us to produce food at a higher level of standards. Again, like I mentioned, the massive urbanization is going to lead to very high concentrations of populations in certain areas of the world, in certain cities. But we're also going to have improved living conditions in rural areas. Your neighbor that we've been used to in the past being a farmer may not necessarily be a farmer, because now any folks from the city can go out and get 10 acres, 20 acres on the countryside and operate and work from home, having their Zoom meetings or whatever they're doing business, and operate from a rural background. So even the population that is moving into rural areas have a different background and a different mentality of the population that we used to relate to in rural areas. So we're going to have to be looking at alternatives to fossil fuels, and we all hear about solar power and wind power and all those others. The private sector is going to be fundamental in creating knowledge. It's not just going to be left in the hands of institutions or governments to create that knowledge, but the private sector. We live in a time where hyperscience or artificial intelligence is part of our future. And the convenience of the delivery of the product and the health that the product delivers is going to be center stage in all these products that we produce. There's going to be an increased direct consumer to producer relationships. And we're going to have to be driven towards improving efficiencies in our production systems if we are going to be feeding all these people. Now, the interesting part is that feeding the human population, this high concentrations in the cities, they live and believe in a new set of standards, right? And they demanding us to produce the product in a much more efficient way. So, but we live in a time where we're blessed. We've had 50,000 generations of mankind, but we only have one generation of Google and modern biotechnology. And we're blessed to be at that stage in time in history that we're able to produce. Now, the consumers in the city, they still believe that food is produced the same way that was produced 30 or 40 or 50 or 80 years ago. And they tend to be romantic about how that food is produced, whether you call that natural, organic, or other tendencies that are out there. And they don't quite like the production of massive production systems, but the reality is we're going to need those large production systems in order to be able to feed the growing human population. So we got to learn about the past in order to be able to create the future, and that's very important. And so when we go and think about that at ST, we heavily emphasize on genetic improvement. Genetic improvement has been a fundamental part of us being able to feed the growing human population over the last 50 years, and will continue to be part of feeding the human population over the next 30 or 50 years. To give you an example, in the poultry business, and this is a very interesting chart, comparing how much genetics improve and production systems increase in poultry. And I use poultry as an example because it's one of the most inexpensive animal protein sources that exists today. In 1925, it used to take us 112 days to feed a bird to slaughter weight. Today, it takes less than 40 days. In 2005, it was 44 days. That bird used to weigh about 2.5 pounds. Today, it weighs more than twice as much. That bird in 1925 used to take almost 5 pounds of feed to a pound of gain. Now we're under 2 pounds of feed to a pound of gain. And the mortality in those animals has been reduced from 18% to below 4%. And this picture represents how much improvement genetics has meant to the poultry industry. Somebody took genetics from 1957 and compared to genetics in 2001. Mind you, 2001 is 19 years ago. And they compared those genetics to put them in the same facility, the same barn, with the same amount of feed, in the same environment, and the same management conditions. And you can see the picture of what these birds used to look like in 1957 versus what they look in 2001. That is a very visual representation of how much genetic improvement has occurred over all this time. So we're able not just to produce more animal protein with less feed, we're also able to do it in a much more efficient way. And why does this matter? Remember, because when the future comes, we're going to have to produce more food with less sources, with less availability of land, with less water. We got to be a lot more efficient. So what is the future for us as an industry in the animal protein world? The farmer is always the center of our attention. Obviously, there's going to be an emphasis on genetics and increasing the production traits, and we talked about that a little bit. But we're also going to have to be looking at some genetics that we haven't looked at in the past, such as environmental traits. Semen is the one incredible tool to deliver those improvements in genetics, whether it's with conventional semen, which traditionally has been done, but now we have access to sexed semen, both for the sexed dairy, but also for beef production or for beef and dairy, even for other species like sheep and goats. So semen allows us to deliver in that same straw that we've had the access to the technology for over 50 years, a significant improvement in the genetics. But we're also going to have access to other tools. And I just use the word robotics as a term that includes a lot of things. In robotics, we got automatic robot milking machines now for dairy cows, but we will also have robotic feeding systems as well. Electronics is a big part of this future as well, as we will have to be monitoring not just the performance of the genetics in those animals, but also the welfare of those animals, the health of those animals. How do we treat those animals? Because the end consumer in those cities is going to want to make sure that we manage those animals in ways that benefit the welfare of the animals and the food that we're consuming. We're probably, most likely, there's going to be a very significant reduction in the utilization of antibiotics in the future. We might be going in a fast direction towards the elimination of hormones in animal protein production. And in some cases, that already has occurred. And then we're also going to go into an era where point-of-care diagnostics of livestock is going to be fundamental. Basically, what we're able to identify at the farm level, what is happening with that animal, how do we treat that animal, and encompassing all these technologies, and that we're able to deliver that to the farmer to make the farmer more productive, not just from the standpoint of producing more food with less land or with less water, but also more productive and the economic benefit to the farmer. So that production for the farmer is more profitable. So in order to do all that, accomplish all that, we got to have a multidisciplinary approach to these things. Genetics is part of it. And in genetics, we can talk about elite germplasm, and we use statistics, and we use animal breeding models, and we do use EPDs, and we use genomics and a lot of these things that we got. We're looking now at molecular biology, where we can actually look at the sequences of this genetics and pinpoint which specific DNA sequences are more likely to produce a better product, a much more efficient product. So we have access to all these technologies that, in a sense, are becoming day-to-day use today, but they were just a thought and a concept 20, 25 years ago. Now we got massive computer systems that allow us to utilize bioinformatics. We're able to use mapping in the case of genetics. We're able to use computer sciences to collect all this data and process all this data to make more informed decisions. Now we combine the genetics, the molecular biology, and the bioinformatics, and we can do it by utilizing two delivery systems. One is embryos. And with embryos, we got technologies that are like in vitro fertilization or cloning or amniocentesis. But we also got sexed semen and semen that can help us deliver this product. So we can deliver this products and this improved genetics through embryos or through semen. And that genetics is going to have, like I was mentioning before, some new novel traits and this animal welfare and animal monitoring. So for example, we launched at ST a product that we call EcoFeed, in which we're measuring feed conversion and feed efficiency for both dairy cattle, beef on dairy, and beef animals. We have to create more protein with less feed, just like the poultry people did. And we also launching a product that's FarmFit, which is a bolus that sits in the rumen of the animal, is able to detect the temperature of the animal 94 times a day and be monitoring the welfare of that animal, the health of that animal 24 hours a day. So when we're looking at this multidisciplinary product and we just limit it to discussion on genetics as a platform, we got the three elements that compose genetics, right? In my opinion, which is the genetics through selecting elite germplasm by selecting EPDs, like we mentioned before, the molecular biology, which I'll talk a little bit more in a second about genomic predictions, DNA sequencing and analysis, and then the utilization of informatics, bioinformatics to make sense of all this information that we create. As we are able to improve the genetics and we're able to collect all that data, why is all that data so important? Because it allows us to increase our accuracy of the prediction so that we're able to determine at a day of age or a week of age what the genetic performance of that animal during its lifetime is going to be. Is that animal more efficient or less efficient? Is that animal more productive or less productive than the average of the population? So we can be creating genetic improvement. A technology that allows us to do that today is DNA sequencing and analysis, genomic predictions, right? Basically, it's looking at the DNA sequence and trying to see among those sequences, which ones refer to fertility traits, growth traits, production traits, health traits, etc. With that information, today we have the ability to take a tissue sample, just an ear punch on a calf, and among a large population of animals that all might look similar or equal, actually identify which one of those animals is the one that is the best one. Which one of those animals is not only be able to give us the advantage to create faster genetic improvement so we can do more in the next population, but also to be more productive for the farmers. And how do we do that? We actually can look at this group of population of animals like you see on the screen and say, okay, among those animals, the animal in the bottom right corner, that is the more productive animal. And now we can actually look at the sequence and the genetic profile of those animals on the female population, for example, and go into the database and look at the sequences of the male population and identify specifically which male is more likely to create further genetic advancement when mated to a specific female. We can do program matings so the next generation is even better than the previous generation. And why is that important? Because we can continue creating genetic improvement and do it in a linear projection, which we will be continuing making genetic improvement if we don't bring all those other technologies in place, but we will do it in a linear model. But by advancing genetics linearly, we're not going to be able to create sufficient genetic improvement to create all the food that we have to be able to create over the next 30, 40 years to feed this population. We got to create this, we got to cause this genetic improvement to be exponential in nature. And that's why all these technologies are so important. So instead of being able to have a cow that makes 52 kilograms of milk, be able to have a cow that makes 75 kilograms of milk. You know, when I was in college 35 years ago, the average milk population of dairy cow in the United States was about 16,000 pounds of milk. Today, we're knocking on 24,000 pounds of milk. That's a 50% improvement in milk production per cow over a 30-year period of time. Now, are we going to be able to have cows that instead of making 24,000 pounds of milk, make 60 or 70 or 80,000 pounds of milk in lactation? And the answer is genetically, yes, we can. But we're going to have to be able to do that while monitoring animal welfare and the well-being of those animals, because that's the kind of demands that our customer base is posing on us. Now, going back to the concept of using this multidisciplinary approach, we go into bioelectronics, right? So there's a series of devices that are out there already today that allows us to collect data on the field and make decisions on these animals. Some of you might be aware, for example, some neck collars that are able to monitor how much an animal walks, how far does an animal walk. There can also be used for heat detection. They can also be used for geoposition of where the animal is located in a farm. They can also be used to be able to do inventories on an animal herd. Another example of bioelectronics is this bolus that I was telling you about before, that sits in the rumen of the animal. It measures the temperature of the animal 94 times a day. It electronically sends all that information to the magic web, and it downloads into your phone. And in that phone, you're going to have everything, the history of that animal from the day the animal was born, who the sire of that calf was, who the dam of that calf was, what the genomic profile is of that animal, of every treatment that animal has ever received in life. So we're able to create through electronics and bioelectronics, full traceability on that animal from production to the utilization and the delivery in the food plate. And so these are technologies that actually exist today. Some of you might have heard of the terminology blockchain in agriculture. Well, that's what blockchain is basically. It's able to take all these different sources of data, analyze them, and determine the traceability from the beginning of the life of that animal until it goes on the plate and is consumed by your end customer base. And we're going to need that to be able to produce all this protein. And we're going to do it in a digital world. Remember, 50,000 generations of humankind, but only one generation of Google. Well, we're in that generation, right? And now with a concept that's called digital farm, your veterinarian is going to have access to information. We're going to have access to the estrus information, the reproductive status of those animals. We're going to be able to do the matings through chromosomal mating by looking at the DNA sequences. We're going to be able to measure the feed efficiencies of the animals, how much specific feed an animal consumed versus what it turns into protein and growth or into productive, production in the case of milk. And we're also going to be able to monitor the well-being of those animals. All that information is going to sit in computers, and the computers exist today to manage all that information, in which literally we have all that information available to us to make decisions. And And so we can do it with obviously with a multitude of things. And we incorporate that genetics platform through the utilization of semen and embryos. Now, talking about what is the innovation of sex sperm, that's when ST came in. We came into existence 20 years ago with a technology that was developed by USDA. We started as a custom collection facility in Navasota, Texas, where basically clients will bring their bulls here to collect semen or collect their embryos, and we did the collection of the semen, and the clients would deliver it. Well, the semen market around the world is a fairly large market. It's about 400 million straws, and semen is being delivered around the world in a very standardized form through the utilization of straws, right? And it can be delivered to any point in the world in the semen tank, and it can be stored for decades and decades under liquid nitrogen. It's a very, very economical product, and it's a very simple technology to utilize. I learned how to artificially inseminate a cow when I was 8 years old. The man who taught me how to artificially inseminate cows at my dad's farm didn't know how to read and write. That's how simple the utilization of artificial insemination is. Now, what happened at USDA, a researcher by the name of Larry Johnson was able to determine that the sex of the offspring, well, we've known this before, actually before Larry, sex of the offspring is determined in mammalians, is determined through the sperm cell. And basically, you got the chromosomes in mammalians, and all the chromosomes are identical size except two, the X and the Y chromosome, with the Y chromosome having less DNA than the X chromosome. So the technology of sex semen, basically what it measures is those two chromosomes, the X and the Y chromosome, in which we're able to tell the difference in the size of those chromosomes. And we're able to separate those cells into a population of sperm cells that in its greatest majority is either going to be a male or a female. And why is this important to separate into a male or a female? Well, dairy cows, to produce milk, they need to be females. Can't get milk out of a bull, right? So dairy farmers are more interested in producing females. While on the other hand, for beef production, a male might be more efficient. A steer might be more desired by a feedlot, by a processing plant, because it carries more pounds of meat, of product, and weight. And all that is accomplished through the utilization of flow cytometry. And flow cytometry is evolved. I'll show you another set of slides here in a second that shows how much this technology has evolved over the last 20 years. This is a picture of our largest lab in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. There's 96 sorters in this lab. So this lab literally has the capacity to produce over 5 million straws of sex semen a year. And not only can we produce that sex semen, but today we can produce it at a very high degree of accuracy. So we can actually make, traditionally we've been making samples that are more than 90% either female or male, but we have the technological capabilities to making samples that are 93, 95, 99% of the desired gender. The process of sex semen had to be initially started by just being able to measure the difference in the size of the chromosome, but the technology has really, truly evolved a lot over time. We had to go and rebuild the technology, the production of the processes of semen from ground zero, because the medias that we utilize today for producing sex semen are totally different medias than the medias that have been traditionally utilized to produce conventional semen. The process is a multi-step process and in the process of the semen. And to give you an example, the medias are produced in a sterile environment. They go into tremendous amounts of quality controls to make sure that we have a standardized product and that the product is repeatable time after time after time after time. How much is the technology of sex semen advanced over the years? Well, back when it first started in the mid-90s, we were able to sort cells, or separate cells, about 200 to 400 cells per second. The purity, meaning the desired gender, was about 83% of the desired sex. But the fertility of that semen was significantly lower than the fertility of conventional semen. It was truly about 70% over the fertility of conventional semen. By the early 2000s, the speeds had gone from 200 to 400 cells per second up to about 1,000 cells per second. The purity had gone up to 85%, and the fertility had gone to about 80% of the fertility of conventional semen. So it improved slightly over a period of about a decade. By 2012, we had quintupled the speed, and now we were up sorting about 5,000 cells per second. The purities remain about that 85% purity, and the fertility had not improved. And that's what the state where we were 10 years ago. It was a product at that point in time that could be utilized, but it was not a product that really matched the fertility of conventional semen. Nowadays, we can run speeds over 10,000 cells per second, but we also improved the technology to the point where we can produce more than 93%. Actually, in some breeds, all the semen that we produce is above 95% of the desired gender. And we could produce semen that is 99% of the desired gender. And now the fertility of sex semen is basically matching the fertility of conventional semen. We've run a lot of trials over the years, over the last 20 years to prove all this data, right? I could tell you that we run easily over 1 million samples. Today, the number of straws of sex semen that are going out in the market commercially since inception is over 100 million straws of semen over this 20 years. Today, in 2021, there'll be over 24 million straws of sex semen produced around the world. So now the product is becoming part of everyday use in not just dairy breeds, but also on beef cattle. The sex semen technology works for basically all mammalian species, right? So we've done cattle, we've done pigs, goats, sheep, deer, horses, and other species as well. Dairy cattle is the largest customer that we have, but also sex semen now can be used in artificial insemination, in multiple ovulation and embryo transfer, in IVF, and in some cases, like in horses, can even be used for sperm injection. And also sex semen can be produced in large quantities. The advantage that we have, and we've been blessed, is that in a sense, because the only thing that we changed was the sperm cells that go inside the straw, the same logistical methods and delivery methods that were developed over 50 years are still in use today. And semen gets transported around the world in the same liquid nitrogen tanks that you use today, that you used 20, 30 years ago. So now we can combine sex semen with other reproductive technologies that allows to get faster genetic improvement in cattle breeding, because we can use sex semen and embryo transfer and IVF in AI, and we can combine that with DNA markers. Assisted reproductive technologies like embryo transfer, embryo splitting, embryo multiplication, ultrasound guided aspiration, IVF, sperm injection, somatic cell cloning, and even prenatal testing are an everyday occurrence. A lot of these technologies can be easily utilized at the farm level today, and they're being utilized at the farm level for many years, even for decades in some cases. So now we have the ability to deliver all these calves and create faster genetic improvement, and we can actually tell what the genetic potential of those animals at a very early stage of their life. And we can utilize that technology to even continue generating the improvement in genetics. So I will talk now about one specific trait that we are heavily involved in, which is called eco-feed. And eco-feed is basically going back to feed conversion. We're measuring significant groups of animals through progeny testing and through genomic evaluations to determine which animals are more efficient. In other words, less pounds of feed to more pounds of either milk or beef. And we've been able to prove that it is a heritable trait. We got to measure a lot of phenotypes, and we got to measure individual animals, and it takes a tremendous amount of data gathering. But we can gather that data because we got technologies with feed efficiency bunks to measure that amount of feed that those animals individually consume. And with all that, we, in a sense, can produce more with less, okay? We can produce more milk or more beef with less land, less fertilizers, less water, less energy to irrigate, less fossil fuels for tractors and other farm equipment. That is a winning combination because it's a winning combination for our end consumers of the cities that are the consumers of our products, but also a winning combination for the producers because now they're able to produce more with less. So the production, their farms become more efficient, more economically viable. And we can utilize that to address some hot topics like reducing methane emissions, right? We can, instead of being able to select adult animals, we can actually select the animals at birth. We can even select those genetics prior to birth by utilizing all these combinations. And can this be effective? It sure can be effective. This is data that UC Davis helped us put together, in which they evaluated over 5,000 heifers that we had tested for feed efficiency. And they used models to calculate if we're able to select those heifers that were more efficient, what would be the benefit to the environment. And by doing that, we're able to create models in which we're able to say that we can create a 13 to 15% reduction in carbon dioxide and on methane, right? But also about a 20% reduction in the water footprint of the animals. And by doing that, we can be reducing the global emissions of methane that some of the environmental folks are trying to press our industries. Again, it's the combination of all those technologies, of all that science, of all that information that will allow us to survive and to be more productive, to be more efficient, and to be more profitable in the future, while at the same time delivering to the human population the feed resources that they require us to make. I'm going to change the slides here real quick and show you another quick set of slides so you all have a little bit of a concept of how big this difference has been in the improvement of one technology, in this case, sexed semen. Again, you see in this picture with the original sorting equipment that Dr. Johnson used at his labs at USDA back in 1984. Well, from Dr. Johnson at USDA, this is a picture of the first high-speed flow cytometer. The original flow cytometer that Johnson used was an analog flow cytometer, equivalent to the phone that I used when I was a kid at home. Was a rotary phone. If you all remember, you stuck your finger in the phone, they had the rotary dial. Some of you might remember, some might not. And it came back, right? Well, from that, we went to digital electronics on the phones. And from that, we went on the phones to what we call the cell phones today. And within the cell phones, we had 13 models now of the Apple phone. And we can be all talking to each other. I could actually be driving down the road and making this presentation on my phone, and you'll be seeing me and listening to me while we do that. And all that was allowed because of the improvements in electronics. And we went from this machine of Dr. Johnson to this machine. And then this is some of the original machines that we use in commercial production when we first started producing sexed semen. If we were to try to produce sexed semen with this equipment today, we would need, in that picture that you saw with 96 sorters, instead of being just a room that is probably 30 by 50 that houses those 96 sorters, we will need a football field of this old model of machines. These machines are no longer used. They're just part of our historic progress in the technology. So we went from inefficient analog sorters to digital sorters that allow us to improve the efficiencies. And that I mentioned that in the previous slides. This is a model of the first digital sorter that one of the first digital sorters that we use. But it still is, we were using the same basic concepts that we're using at the beginning, right? We're looking at the difference in DNA content. So we were able to replace those analog sorters for digital electronics with a lot of smaller footprint and a lot bigger efficiencies. And this gives you a concept of how much this sorter back in '86, the original Epix machine that Dr. Johnson used, well, it was basically 200 to 500 cells per second. You know, by 2011, we could be sorting above 30,000 events per second. Today, we sort over 50,000 events. We look at over 50,000 events per second. Just like your phones have evolved over the last 15, 20 years, so has sexed semen. You know, in addition to that, this is another two models of the sorters that we use. The one on the left side is machines that we were using about 7 years ago. The one on the right, on the left side, I'm sorry. The one on the right side is the machines that we've been using for the last 5 or 6 years. But it was not just the combination, like I mentioned before, in electronics and equipment that we changed. It was also everything that we did, how we processed the semen, the medias that we utilized, the quality controls that went into place. Is a very high degree of technological improvements that occurred over the years. And those technological improvements is what have been able to allow us to improve the fertility of the product, right? So we're today, like I mentioned before, we realistically have about the same conception rates with sexed semen that we have with conventional semen. And we got very large data sets to prove this to be the fact. We will be moving, as the time goes, into a new generation of equipment. This is a picture of our next generation of equipment. It's a microfluidic sorter in the size of a credit card. There's 72 channels on that chip in there, right? So think about it. That's 72 times the power of one of the original machines that we have. And this is how much progress this technologies have made. And that's what allows us to operate on the massive scale that we operate today. With that being said, that was quite a quick synopsis of where the technologies come from. I got to figure out how to get out of the stop sharing system here. That's how we moved from a technology that was an inception 20 years ago to a large scale production today, while keeping the quality controls and delivering of the quality of the product that we deliver today to the end consumer. But most importantly, we're super excited that we now have access to other technologies that allows us to look at the future in a bright way. We smile about the possibilities of being part of feeding the world, about being part of a group like you all are, that have the responsibility of generating the food production, the quality of the food, the control of the quality of that product, that will make our most important consumer, that end consumer that lives in the city, that buys our products, happy to consume our products. If anybody's got any questions or any thoughts, I'll be glad to answer anything. I can keep on talking for a long time. So I'll turn it over to you, Haley. Well, everybody went mute. I think everybody's on mute, or I'm disconnected. I don't know which one it is.
Hi, Juan. No, you're still good. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions. If anyone has any questions for Juan. I'm going to ask a question, Juan. So as our beef social media specialist, we get a lot of questions on our social media platforms about, what the difference is between our programs within our beef, STgenetics beef. So that being ultra fertility and STalgenetics. So I was going to see if you could just kind of answer that for some of our customers who might be new, or some of our team members who maybe don't know the difference between the different logos and programs within STgenetics beef. So could you just kind of explain to everyone what ultra fertility is and what STalgenetics is and what makes it different?
So in the case of ultra fertility is like I was mentioned earlier, we went through a process of improving the technology over the years, right? And when we first saw the first big jump in fertility on the product from the old processing systems and the old medias, that we make the first change where, like if you remember the original product maybe had 75% of the fertility of conventional semen, and we make the big jump where the fertility was more, about 85 to 90% of the fertility of conventional semen. We call that product Sex Ultra. And that product basically encompasses not only the improvement on the equipment, but also on the processing and on the medias. And that product had contained 2 million cells in the straw. Then we found out that if we added 2 more million cells to a straw, 4 million, so we made it 4M, then the fertility of the product made a further increase, and to where it got us to the same level as conventional semen, or fairly close to conventional semen. There's still some differences in the fertility between bulls, right? So we labeled that quality of that product on the sex semen part, Sex Ultra. And we got Sex Ultra and Sex Ultra 4M. And then within the genetic programs, we got different types of bulls and different types of genetics. And in the case of the name Stal, that's more of the genetics that encompasses selection of bulls for phenotypes, or the type that people like with the show bulls and things like that. Now, to give you another example, if you were to look at our dairy catalog, we rank our bulls according to different parameters, and we're headed in the same direction with the beef. So you may have a list of bulls that are selected for production of cheese, or on a cheese merit basis, versus bulls that are selected for high milk productions. In the same way with beef products, we're heading in a direction where we'll have groups of bulls that are genetically selected more for either some of the growth traits versus some of the finishing traits at the feedlot versus some of the carcass traits at the end. So that different producers that have different selection parameters can have an easier way to select those bulls depending on those genetic parameters. Also, we'll have a set of bulls that will be high for feed efficiency and feed conversion, or average daily gain in feed efficiency and feed conversion. In a sense, we live in an era where different producers got different requirements, and we have the need to meet all those different requirements. There's a question here. Can they develop XX or YY bulls to control sex of offspring under rich conditions?
Yeah, I was going to read that one to you, Juan. Go ahead.
So basically that is bulls that in natural breeding only produce one sex or the other. Scientifically, theoretically, that is possible to do. But then we will be faced with a situation that is interesting for all of us to talk about. Going back to the parameters or the requirements that our most important consumer ask of us. So that consumer in the city today, in the culture that we live in, the environment that we live in, they want us to produce food under certain conditions. And one of the things that apparently they don't like is the utilization of genetic deletions or transgenics and things like that. In order to produce an XX or a YY bull, we would need to be able to do genetic manipulations where it would encompass genetic deletions and alterations of the genetic sequence, not through natural means, but through scientific ways. So scientifically, yes, it is possible, but the big question is, will the end consumer be willing to accept that? And I don't have the answer for that, but down the line, in order to feed this world population 30, 40, 50, 60 years from now, that may be necessary. At this point in time, I think that it was in all our best interest to try to produce food in the most natural way possible, right? I mentioned the importance is going to be the reduction in the utilization of antibiotics, the possible elimination of the utilization of hormones. being able to track the animals and make sure that the animals were raised in the meat animal welfare parameters. The consumer will pay us for that. They will pay us a premium for that animals. I go to HEB, which is the local supermarket here, and if I look at a tray of chicken breast, there's trays that says all natural, and then you look at the label, the all natural label says, no additives, no hormones. It's got a certain list of parameters, and that's, they're paying a premium for that product versus the regular chicken. It's going to happen the same way with beef or with milk. The end consumer wants us to produce the product that they consume and eat on an everyday basis with certain parameters. And I think that we have to orient ourselves to be able to produce that product, and they'll pay us for it.
Hey, Juan, this is Shelby. I was just wondering, I give tours to some customers and people who come by the office there in Navasota, and everyone always asks me how ST and sexing technology started and kind of where your passion grew from. So I thought it'd be interesting if maybe you can go into detail about where you developed a passion for the dairy and the beef cattle industry, and kind of how you got started with STgenetics and how it grew.
So I was born and raised in Colombia, South America. My dad had both a dairy farm and a beef farm. So I grew up with a farm background and animal background. I came to college. I went to Ohio State, and from Ohio State, I had the fortune to come to Texas A&M at a time where IVF and in vitro fertilization was getting started 35 years ago. And at that time, IVF was a technology, was in its earliest stages. Like sexed semen, it just was not very efficient. And years later, we started doing services commercially, collecting bulls and collecting embryos, like I mentioned earlier. And I always wanted to do IVF. And one of there was challenges with IVF, and especially at that time, we were servicing the Brahma breed, and there was a very significant market for Brahma females, but there was not a market for Brahma bulls that was that great at all. So it was common sense that it was worthwhile producing females and not males, right? And that was about the time that the first thought about commercializing sexed semen that had been invented at USDA got started with a company Colorado called XY. So I gathered a group of friends and family and clients and convinced them that that was a cool technology and it was in their early stages and that they trusted us. And with those friends and family and clients, we put some money together and we got a license from XY. And the original concept, because the technology was very, very inefficient and very expensive at the time, was really to use sexed semen in IVF at the time. And so we started using sexed semen in IVF and a little bit of embryo transfer, specifically on Brahma cattle. And it seemed to work fairly well. It was expensive, it was inefficient, but it worked, right? We could get the desired sex. And I had friends from the dairy industry because I'd gone to Ohio State. Some of my friends were working for bull studs, and the natural thing, because most semen gets used in dairy cattle, was to try it on dairy cattle. So we got involved in sorting and producing sexed semen from dairy bulls. From there, we evolved into having our own genetics on the dairy side, and because we needed bulls to be able to run experiments and trials to try to improve the technology. So we went and bought a group of dairy bulls and started testing on large scale in dairy farms to see how we could improve the product. And I always had the passion for the genetics and the selection of a better animal. I always figure if you're going to have an animal, you may as well have as good an animal as you can have. So we got involved in the genetic side, and obviously from there, because we had the background on beef, and we started as a beef bull stud to get involved in the beef breed. So originally with Brahmas, and then we moved with some of the other Boston Nichols influenced breeds like Beef Masters and Brangus, and we evolved into the dairy breeds with the Holsteins and Jerseys and Brown Swiss, and one thing led to another one. Always trying to get better, but in reality, we owe all this to the trust and the belief that those original friends and family and clients had in us to trust us to take a risk with us, and not only them, but also the fortune that we had to surround ourselves with a lot of great staff, a lot of great people that without whom we would have never been able to reach the point where we reach, right? All these things are always a team effort. It takes a lot of people, a lot of passion, a lot of desire to make things happen, and with the commitment to always try to improve. I always say that never be happy with how good you're today. Always try to be better tomorrow. And we've been just super fortunate and blessed to have, the people, some of the people in this group be part of it, not just on the beef side, but also on the dairy side. So just to give you the thought, today we operate 45 different labs in 19 different countries around the world. So it's been a journey of being blessed with the friends and the team effort and the trust of a lot of clients around the world that taken the risk in the initial days to use product that, to be honest, very honest, it was not up to par in the quality, but they wanted to desire sex on their offspring of their animals and give us the trust and belief in the time to make it better. And because of the philosophy of always trying to be better the next day, we've been able to improve the product. And that's the reason that we're here today. And looking forward to a great future with all your help and support and all the work that everybody does, and try to keep it expanding. If you think about it, today we produce more than 20 million straws of semen, but the overall world market for semen is 400 million straws. So we got a long ways to go, but most importantly, we got a social responsibility to feed the world. And that's what drives us every day.
Great. Thank you so much, Juan. Does anyone else have any questions? Again, you can type them in the chat, or you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask it aloud.
Y'all are a pretty quiet group, so.
Juan, someone in the chat said, could you comment on the research into Parkinson's?
Yeah, I can say a few things about it. So some of the technologies that we're involved in is a technology. I show you the chip on the picture that is what is called a GMP compliant cell sorter. With GMP compliant means is a device that is able to process cells under sterile conditions. So we're not able just to identify the cells, but separate them with a very high degree of accuracy, and to be able to do it in a sterile way. And when you're dealing with cells that are going to be injected into a human being for any kind of treatment, those cells have to be sterile, right? And so the technology is very, very advanced. It's very, very accurate, and it is GMP compliant. So it's being utilized now to identify some cells that are believed to be able to be used for the possible treatment of Parkinson's disease. So the equipment is being utilized for that purpose today, and is under trials, research trials right now, in which they identify a cell line that, when properly isolated and separated, possibly can be used for the treatment of Parkinson's disease by injecting the cells into the human brain. And with the aging population that we have, as I mentioned in one of the previous slides, that the average lifespan of human beings on the earth is increasing significantly. So the occurrence of some of these things like Parkinson's are increasing, and if the treatment works, it will be probably one of my happiest days of my life, to being able to have the honor of being a little part of bringing something better to humankind.
All right, Juan, we have another question in the chat. What are your thoughts on efficiency gains we can make with advances in individual animal traceability from the rangeland through the feeding and processing beef chain?
Oh, wow, that's a super interesting question. I actually was outside previous to this call with two of the team members here discussing specifically that subject, right? Today we have the technology, for example, of being able to collect all the data on an animal from the day that animal is born. So the animal is born that day, we can take a tissue sample and do a genomic evaluation on the DNA sequence of that animal. Then we can actually collect just something as simple as the birth weight of that animal. And we can collect every treatment that animal goes and every location that animal has ever been to. So as that animal moves down through the growth stages, and it goes from being a calf to being a steer or a heifer, and is growing, whether it's after weaning or in a feedlot, being able to trace that animal all the way from its beginning to the plate. And we have the electronic systems, the processing capabilities today to establish those systems. And really, those systems would not just benefit the producers, because it allows the producers to be much more efficient in its decisions, right? You're able to say, okay, separate the animals based on genetics. These animals are going to be more likely to produce prime or choice beef versus these animals are more likely to produce select beef, or these animals are more likely to have a higher average daily gain. So we can deliver them to a slaughter weight with less days on feed. So it improved the whole processing, the whole logistical chain of the production of these products. But at the same time gives us the ability to have full traceability. And it's just the ability to use a combination of these technologies to be able to produce the end consumer with this data. And we have the technologies today. We just have to have the ability to implement them on an everyday to-day operation, but the technologies do exist today. Now, some of those technologies, the farmer is going to say, well, they cost too much money to implement. Well, that's true. It may cost too much money to implement today, but if you're producing a higher quality product, you're going to get a higher value for that product. So you're going to be paid for implementing those technologies. You're going to get a reward for doing that in more efficient production systems. So, and the cost of those technologies will go down over time. I'll just use sexed semen for an example in reducing the cost of a product, right? When sexed semen first went out, and I compared on utilizing average genetics, so you don't look at it from the standpoint of the genetic value in that semen, but it used to cost $60 or more to produce a sex straw semen. Today it costs, $10, $12, $15 to produce a straw sex semen. It's the same way that every product, every technology advances. I got a friend of mine who was an engineer at Texas Instruments when the first calculators were produced, right? And that calculator was about this big, and all it could do was add, subtract, and multiply and divide. Just the four basic math functions, right? And he said when they had the original launch, and that calculator would cost $1,500. And the head engineer at Texas Instruments made a statement that day, as I'm told, that always stuck with me. The guy said, you know what, folks, 25 years from now, you're going to be buying at Walmart a calculator that is about this big, that is not going to be needing any batteries. And that's true today because you can have solar power for those calculators. And the mathematical functions that are going to be, the mathematical power that calculator is going to be 100-fold what this original Texas Instrument calculator can do. And instead of costing $1,500, you're going to be able to buy a calculator for $2. Well, that actually occurred. You can go buy a calculator, a little basic calculator at Walmart today that fits in your pocket for $5, $10, right? And that's the evolution of technology. So we should fully expect technologies to continue evolving to becoming more cost efficient and a lower cost to the producer. But it is the producer's responsibility to be able to implement them into everyday use.
Great. Thank you so much, Juan. We have another question in the chat. It says, what is the timeline for the gig to be commercial equipment?
I'm sorry again?
What is the timeline for the Gigasort to be commercial equipment?
Well, like I said, we're utilizing it today for some really important things like the selection of this Parkinson's this cells for possible treatment of Parkinson's. As far as implementing that technology into sex sorting, we thought we were going to have it being implemented here in the next 2 to 3 years, but we got some other technologies that we've been developing that could actually make the GigaSort obsolete here in the next 2 years. And that's one of the things that we do. We continuously invest in R&D and develop research and development to try to make things better and much more efficient, right? And sometimes we end up making our own advancements obsolete before they even go into production. So even though the GigaSort is an incredible piece of equipment, it's a super powerful machine, and it will have a place to be used, we got also other technologies that will be competing with the GigaSort. There's another question here. It says, when will beef be selected for health traits? I think we got the ability to do that today. You know, can we identify genetic lines of cattle that are able to produce, just to say one lower cholesterol or better type of cholesterol? Yes, we do. We have those abilities. Those genetic traits do exist in the animal population. Can we identify? Yes, we can identify. And can we select for them and make fast genetic improvement? Yes, we can. One of the drawbacks that genetic improvement had in either beef or dairy is the long generation intervals that we have in cattle traditionally, right? So 9 months for a pregnancy, 2 years for that animal after he's born to have his first calf. Now you're up to 3 years of age. And so that cycle of genetic improvement, it used to take 4, 5, 6 years. And now you had to do it across multiple generations to be able to make faster genetic improvement. Well, now we got technologies like in vitro fertilization, you know, aspirating oocytes via ultrasound, genomic testing, where we actually can make an embryo in vitro, get a DNA sequence on that embryo, identify if it's genes that are desired or not, select those embryos that carry the genes, transfer, and be able to shorten that generation interval from 5 or 6 years down to, we're down to about, on the dairy side, we're down to in a generation interval under 2 years of age right now. So the rate of genetic improvement that we can create is at least 2.5 to 3 times what it used to be just 10 years ago. And that allows us to select for all these traits, including some of these health traits, at a faster pace to make that a reality if the consumer desires us to do that. We have to live in a world where we got to be watching what our end consumer, what the folks that when we go to the supermarket, what those people in the supermarket, what do they desire to buy and what did they desire to buy? But it's not only about milk having some of these health traits or beef having some of those health traits. It's also about the health traits on the animals, right? Can we select these genetic populations, these populations genetically to be able to have a higher level of immunity, an immune system that's stronger, so it doesn't get sick, so it doesn't require antibiotics, so it can be grown with less treatments or without treatment. And we have scientifically, as an industry, we got that ability today. And we didn't have those abilities as an industry 20 years ago, 15 years ago. Our technologies have been maturing over the last 20 years. And we live in a very, very fortunate time that all those technologies are converging now at this point in time so that we can utilize. And so we firmly believe that it's not going to be about one technology, but about a combination of different technologies that are going to allow us to feed the world. So we got to look at the health traits, not just from the product itself, but from the animal as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Juan. Does anyone else have any more questions? Again, you can type them in the chat or you can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask.
Juan, Danny, you talk about cutting back antibiotics. but the consumer is concerned about the welfare of the animal. Most of them don't realize when we cut antibiotics, usually the death rate or the sickness rate goes up and the health of the animal goes down. How far away, how do we educate the consumer of that, and or how far into the future are we going to go before, as you talked about, having the animals that are more genetically prone to have better immunities so they have less respiratory and other issues? How far do you believe we are away from that?
So I think that we have to be, when we talk about utilization of antibiotics, obviously antibiotics got a place and time, and they're needed. And when an animal gets sick, we always should be striving to treat that animal in the best way possible to bring that animal back to health, right? But we got to do it in a responsible manner. So it might not be necessarily a total elimination of antibiotics as much as the truly responsible utilization of antibiotics and the reduction of that utilization as much as possible. And I think part of getting to that point is not just the responsibility of the producers as to how they utilize this antibiotics, but also this genetic selection of those animals that have a higher immunity level. And we do have the data now without any doubt that they do exist in the population and that we can genetically select for them. So how long is it going to be, Danny? If you had asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have told you 30 years. If you ask me that question today, I think that time is being cut in less than half. So we're making very significant strides in the identification of those genetics, and the ability to utilize whole genome sequencing and analyze the sequences of those animals and what sequences are more likely to carry the genes that provide us with those animals that got a higher immunity. That's a reality. That's not any longer a dream. That is an actual reality. Now, it will take time, not just for the selection of the animals or the genetic improvement of those animals. I don't think that's going to take a very long time. It's going to take time for those genes to be spread into the greater population. And that might take longer than 10 years or 15 years that the selection will take us, Danny. That the spreading into the greater population might be a process of 20 years. But then again, 20 years is nothing. We started with sexed semen 20 years ago, and look where we're at today, right? If we had said 20 years ago that we weren't going to be able to get sexed semen to the levels of fertility there today and to the production efficiency levels there today, it would have never been done. Likewise, we got to take the attitude that it might take us 20 years, but we're not doing this just for ourselves. We're doing this for our kids, our grandkids, our families, and everybody around us. We as human beings got to live with that premise that we got to work for not just for ourselves, but also for the next generations.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you for your question, Danny. Does anyone else have any more questions in the chat or aloud? All right. Well, I just want to go ahead and thank everyone so much for joining on tonight's webinar. Again, we do these once a month, and it's typically within the middle of the month, usually on a Tuesday or a Wednesday evening. And we were just so excited to have Juan on tonight because, again, we get so many questions about, what is ST, who is ST, and what do we do? And so it was great to have him on and just be able to answer questions and kind of give an overview of what Sexing Technologies is. And if, like I said at the beginning of the meeting, if some of your customers or friends or family didn't get to join in tonight, I do record all of these webinars and I post them on our STgenetics Beef YouTube channel. So they'll be able to go and watch there here in the next couple of days once I get it posted. But Juan, I just want to thank you so much for being able to join us tonight and giving us a great presentation and just giving us your wisdom and your time and your efforts. And we thank you so much. And we will see everyone at the next webinar, which will be probably mid-December, right before everyone kind of goes off for their Christmas holiday and Christmas break. So be looking on our social media pages for more details and information on that webinar. And I think that's it for tonight. So thanks everyone for joining, and we hope to see you next time.